On a cold January morning in 1793, the streets of Paris awoke to an unsettling silence. The city, once considered the most elegant in Europe, now breathed the heavy air of revolution. From the early hours, a crowd gathered in the Place de la Révolution, formerly Place Louis XVI, where a sinister structure rose against the gray sky, the guillotine. Within hours, this instrument of death would claim its most notable victim yet, Louis XVI. The man who had ruled France by divine right for 18 years, a direct descendant of St. Louis and Louis XIV, the Sun King, was about to be executed like a common criminal before the eyes of his people. How did it come to this? Once the most powerful monarch in Europe, anointed by God in the Cathedral of Rheims, Louis XVI would end his days as citizen Louis Capet, convicted of treason by the same people he once vowed to protect. To understand this extraordinary and terrible ending, we must go back in time and follow the path that took this man from the golden halls of Versailles to the revolutionary scaffold in the heart of Paris. Born on August 23, 1754 in the Palace of Versailles, Louis Auguste was the third son of the Dauphin of France, son of Louis XV. He was not destined to reign. Two older brothers preceded him in the line of succession. However, after the premature deaths of his father in 1765 and then his brothers, Louis unexpectedly became heir to the French throne as a teenager. The young prince was unprepared for this destiny. Shy, socially awkward, and lacking charisma, Louis preferred solitary activities like hunting, reading, and curiously locksmithing. He described this passion as a trade fit for a king because it taught one how to open doors. This fascination with locks and mechanisms would become a bitter irony years later when no lock could save him from his fate. Though his education in science, languages, and religion was rigorous, it lacked practical instruction in governance. His tutors instilled in him a strong sense of duty and unwavering religious piety, but taught him little about the complexities of politics or diplomacy. He was trained for a world that was already vanishing. At 16, as was customary to secure alliances between European powers, Louis married Archduchess Marie Antoinette of Austria, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa. The marriage, held in May 1770, symbolized the alliance between the Bourbon and Habsburg houses, longtime enemies. The young Austrian princess, just 14 years old, was Louis's opposite, lively, outgoing, and passionate about court life. The first years of their marriage were difficult and humiliating. For 7 long years, the union remained unconsummated, fueling cruel rumors throughout the European courts. The cause, as royal doctors would later reveal, was the king's physical condition, which was finally resolved with a minor operation. This belated intimacy, however, marked the beginning of a relationship that, despite their differences, would eventually transform into a bond of genuine affection and mutual respect. On May 10, 1774, at just 20 years old, Louis ascended the throne after the death of his grandfather, Louis XV. "My God, guide us and protect us. We are too young to reign," were his first words as king, a sign of the insecurity that would follow him throughout his reign. He was inheriting a country in crisis. The royal finances were in ruins. The aristocracy fiercely defended its privileges, and a growing bourgeois class demanded reforms. France was seething with the new ideas of the Enlightenment, while its feudal structure remained stuck in past centuries. The first years of Louis XVI's reign seemed promising. He appointed reformist ministers like Turgot and Malesherbes, enlightened men who tried to modernize the tax system and eliminate feudal abuses. He supported the American Revolution by sending troops and funds to fight Britain, an act that, while boosting French prestige, worsened the kingdom's financial crisis. It is a cruel historical irony that Louis XVI, a monarch genuinely concerned for his people's welfare and more open to reform than his predecessors, would end up paying for the excesses of earlier generations. Had he been born 2 centuries earlier or 2 centuries later, one historian remarked, he might have been remembered as a good king. But Louis XVI had the misfortune of ruling precisely when the old regime was collapsing under its own weight. As the economic crisis deepened, public discontent grew. The poor harvests of 1787 and 1788 triggered famines. Bread, the staple of the French diet, became unaffordable. Queen Marie Antoinette, unfairly nicknamed Madame Deficit, became a lightning rod for popular anger, accused of extravagance and indifference. Many of these accusations were exaggerated or false, but the public perception of a monarchy out of touch with the people took firm root. In 1789, driven by the financial crisis, Louis XVI summoned the Estates General, a body of representatives from the nobility, clergy, and commoners, which had not convened since 1614. Meant to approve new taxes, this act would inadvertently spark the French Revolution. Representatives of the Third Estate, led by figures like Sieyès and Mirabeau, demanded voting by head rather than by estate, giving them greater influence due to their numbers. When the privileged estates resisted, the Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly and vowed not to disband until France had a constitution. The famous tennis court oath on June 20, 1789, marked a turning point. Reform was no longer enough. Now the goal was transformation. Louis XVI, ever indecisive, wavered between repression and concession. He attempted to dissolve the assembly by force, then backed down when faced with early signs of popular resistance. Meanwhile, unrest escalated in Paris. On July 14th, the Bastille was stormed. Though militarily minor, the act had massive symbolic weight. The people were defying royal authority. That night, when the Duke of La Rochefoucauld-Liancourt told Louis of the fall of the Bastille, the king exclaimed, "Is it a revolt?" To which the Duke replied, "No, sire, it is a revolution." This anecdote illustrates the king's failure to grasp the scale of the events unfolding around him. The following weeks saw more violence. In the provinces, peasants attacked castles and burned feudal records. In Versailles, the Assembly abolished feudal privileges on August 4th. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, passed on August 26th, established principles of liberty and equality that directly contradicted absolute monarchy. On October 5th to 6th, 1789, thousands of Parisian women, angry over food shortages, marched to Versailles. They stormed the palace and forced the royal family to relocate to Paris, effectively making them prisoners of the revolution. Versailles' golden age was over. Over the next 2 years, as the Assembly drafted a constitution to transform France into a constitutional monarchy, Louis XVI appeared to cooperate. In private, he was horrified to see his powers limited, and the Catholic Church, an institution to which he was deeply devoted, reformed against the Pope's wishes. The civil constitution of the clergy required priests to swear loyalty to the state over Rome, creating a crisis of conscience for the devout king. He reluctantly signed the document, a spiritual rupture that would torment him. The royal family's situation grew more precarious. In April 1791, a mob blocked their attempt to visit their Easter residence in Saint-Cloud with a non-juring priest. Convinced he could no longer rule from Paris, Louis XVI began planning his escape. On the night of June 20th, 1791, disguised as servants of a Russian baroness, the royal family fled Paris in a large carriage, heading toward the Austrian Netherlands. Their goal was to reach Montmédy, where loyal General Bouillé had troops waiting. From there, the king hoped to negotiate from a position of strength, possibly with foreign help. The escape, planned for months, was foiled by delays and missteps. The most critical error came in Saint-Ménehould, where the king was recognized by Postmaster Drouet, who had seen his face on coins. Drouet rushed ahead and organized a blockade at Varennes. At dawn on June 22nd, the royal family was arrested. 2 days later, they returned to Paris under National Guard escort, met by a silent crowd that turned their backs in contempt. The flight to Varennes changed everything. The illusion of a willing constitutional monarch was shattered. Louis XVI had been caught fleeing, presumably to launch a counter-revolution with foreign backing. Whatever trust remained was gone. Although the Assembly accepted the excuse that the king had been kidnapped and conditionally restored him, republicanism gained ground rapidly. On September 14, 1791, Louis XVI swore loyalty to the new constitution in a solemn ceremony. For a brief moment, constitutional monarchy seemed possible. But war loomed. Austria and Prussia, alarmed by events in France and concerned for Marie Antoinette, sister of the Austrian emperor, issued the Declaration of Pillnitz, threatening to restore the king's power. On April 20, 1792, France declared war on Austria. Ironically, both radicals who hoped to spread revolution and the king, who secretly hoped for defeat and restoration, supported the war. Early military failures fueled suspicions of treason. After the Duke of Brunswick, commander of Austro-Prussian forces, threatened to destroy Paris if the royal family was harmed, public fury exploded. On August 10, 1792, an insurrection stormed the Tuileries Palace. The royal family barely escaped to the Legislative Assembly while their Swiss guards were massacred. The Assembly suspended the king and called for a national convention. That night, the royal family was imprisoned in the Temple, a former Templar fortress. It would be Louis XVI's final home. Initially treated with dignity, the conditions worsened. Eventually, he was stripped of writing materials and moved to a smaller cell. On September 21, 1792, the monarchy was abolished and the Republic proclaimed. Soon after, secret documents found in the Tuileries exposed Louis's correspondence with foreign powers, confirming his efforts to undermine the revolution. The convention decided to try Louis Capet for treason. The trial began on December 11th. He faced 33 charges, including espionage, conspiracy, and crimes against state security. Though allowed legal defense, the outcome was all but certain. Louis XVI conducted himself with unexpected dignity. He answered calmly, mounting a legal defense. His lawyers argued that the king, as a constitutional monarch, should be protected under the Constitution. One famously declared, "I search for judges and find only accusers." On January 15, 1793, the convention unanimously declared Louis guilty. The penalty vote was close, 387 to 334, for death. On January 20th, the Justice Minister informed Louis of the verdict. He calmly requested 3 days to prepare, freedom to see his family, and to choose his priest. Only the last 2 were granted. Execution was set for the next morning. That evening, he met with his family. The farewell was heartbreaking. He promised to see them the next day. A merciful lie. He knew it was the end. After dining and praying with his chosen priest, he wrote a will. "I forgive those who are my enemies without cause. I ask my son, if he ever rules, never to avenge my death." He reaffirmed his Catholic faith and expressed regret for signing the civil constitution. On the morning of January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was taken to the Place de la Révolution. 80,000 people stood in silence. At 10:10 a.m., the king stepped out of the carriage and protested when they tried to tie his hands. His priest whispered, "This is one more likeness to our Savior." Louis replied, "I will make this last sacrifice." At 10:22, the blade fell. The executioner held up the severed head. Some cried, "Long live the Republic," but most stood silent. Later, many soaked cloths in his blood, some as relics, others as trophies. Louis XVI's body was buried in an unmarked grave. His death shocked Europe and signaled the beginning of the Reign of Terror. Marie Antoinette would be guillotined months later. Their son died in prison in 1795. Years later, their remains were moved to the Basilica of Saint-Denis. A chapel was built in their memory. Louis XVI's death marked the end of divine monarchy and the birth of modern political power. From the people, not God. He died as a king, but found dignity as a man. His legacy endures, controversial, tragic, and defining. The royal blood spilled that day in the square of the Revolution would nourish both the terrors and the hopes of a political modernity that we, its heirs, are still trying to fully understand. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about history's most tragic monarchs. What other king or queen would you like to see featured in the next episode? Leave it in the comments.